Hey, what's up? This is Active Noise Cancelling here. There's a recurring topic of conversation within the world of clothing and streetwear of style versus fashion. What is the difference between style and fashion? What does it mean to be a stylish person versus a fashionable one? Which of the two should you aim to be? In almost all of these cases, the conversation moves in a very similar way. Being fashionable is the art of following fashion trends, dressing in a very of-the-moment way, wearing cool brands and items. But style, that's being a free thinker in the world of fashion, wearing the clothing which best represents you, and in fact the term which comes up most often is personal style. The conclusion, of course, is that any sensible person should aim to be stylish, develop that sense of personal style, and leave all those fashion followers in the dust. But I think all these people approach this topic of style versus fashion in a fundamentally wrong way, and here's why. So first off, before I go on an unhinged rant, I'm not trying to make this a takedown of anyone in particular or say that anyone who has thought along these lines before is really stupid or anything. I just want to present an alternative viewpoint to what I think is an oversimplification of people recommending the avoidance of trends in favour of finding this holy grail of personal style, as well as a bit of a misrepresentation of what the relationship between style and fashion actually is. I also want to clarify I'm not going to be jumping to the defense of trend hopping. If you've seen any of my content before, you probably notice I've got a relatively consistent aesthetic, or a personal style, you might say, rather than me jumping from one trend to another. Nonetheless, why do I appear to be coming to the defense of fashion as opposed to style? Fashion bad is certainly a very easy argument to sell because there are multiple very valid reasons not to go chasing every micro trend under the sun, and you've probably heard some of them before. You have to keep updating your wardrobe every couple of seasons as the things you own go from trendy to uncool. You might find yourself over-consuming as you're always in a race to buy the hot new thing before everyone else does. And perhaps most importantly, wearing fashion just isn't you, bro. You're not like these other guys and girls. You're different, you're special. Just dressing for fashion is doing yourself a disservice because you're not identifying what you truly like. You're just dressing for society, man. It's hard to be against that. No one's going to come out and say, actually dressing like everyone else with no individual thought is definitely the best way to do it. Come join the NPCs with us. If you really like, you could be a named NPC and give someone a side quest to find your lost cat. Presenting that as bad or something to avoid, therefore means presenting the opposite is good. And it does of course acknowledge that you, yes you dear viewer, are unique, and you deserve that individuality to be reflected externally, not just blend in with a crowd with everyone else. And that is where personal style comes in. Personal style is about knowing yourself, both your physical self, i.e. your proportions, what kind of clothing looks best on you, and your mental self, i.e. what kind of characteristics or interests or things about you do you want to reflect to the world around you with your clothing. Understand those things goes the fashion versus style conversation, and you unlock the ability to be stylish all the time and not be a slave to those nasty fashion trends, saving yourself some money in the process because rather than buying new TikTok approved resale clothing all the time, you're just sticking to those things that you like. Plus, now you're the main character. You get to be the one rescuing the cats and you get a cool shield as a reward. That on paper sounds a lot better. For some, that's where it ends. Personal style good, trend hopping bad, and that is a very easy argument to digest. If you're a big brain fashion commentator though, you will go one level further than this. If people are really smart, they'll recommend the true way to be an enlightened clothing enjoyer is, now this is the high IQ part, to take elements of fashion trends which you really like and incorporate them into your personal style. Fashion is sold forever. We can all go home. All you need to do is combine classic trend-immune items of clothing with more trendy of-the-moment ones which you particularly like to simultaneously present yourself as an enlightened individual who understands the current fashion climate whilst riding high above it like a god. It's so easy. Thanks for coming to my TED Talk. Like and subscribe, upvotes to the left. Good night. If you haven't guessed by my slightly facetious tone, I don't think this is the most helpful advice, even if it isn't necessarily wrong. Trying to find a style that suits you personally is fundamentally a noble goal. It's something that most people try to achieve with the way that they dress. But I think presenting this oversimplification of the relationship most people have with style and fashion, and then giving that as advice, can actually steer people in the wrong direction. First off, the basic advice of focusing on personal style and avoiding fashion tends to conclude with anything can work, so do the thing that appeals to you the most. And they'll often do that by showing examples of very, very different aesthetics, all of which look cool in various ways, from Eddie-era SLP, to the extended proportions of Rick Owens, to the current meta of hiking-infused streetwear trends of outdoor fashion and gorpcore. People might even go back to the mid-20th century to pick out pictures of hard-boiled detectives looking through shuttered windows thinking about femme fatales. A lot of people would consider this to look cool despite it having very little relationship with fashion in 2023. And they're not wrong, all kinds of different aesthetics can still look good to people for different reasons. But using this full spectrum of aesthetics as evidence and then concluding, well, anything can work, isn't really that helpful, especially when it's coming from self-professed fashion enthusiasts or experts. Imagine going to a chef and saying, "Teach me about cooking, what kind of ingredients and flavors should I use?" And they come back and say, "Just develop your personal taste and use whatever flavors you like. Anything can taste good." And they show you a grilled fish and an ice cream sundae as examples. Okay, great, it goes without saying no one's gonna go and deliberately cook fish if they know they hate it, but the chef is the person with the expertise, so they should be able to provide some guidance. What combines well, what do people like at the moment, what's an easy way to make a tasty dish? I think a more helpful response would be something like, well, a lot of people are doing ramen and Japanese dishes at the moment, hey, try this recipe, it's super easy to do, and there's loads of variations you can introduce so you can find the flavors within that you really like. They'd essentially be giving you fashionable cooking advice. They're telling you what sort of things people are enjoying at the moment to use as a starting off point. And if they do that, you're probably going to find there's more recipes available and easy to find, better availability of ingredients, and it means people engaging with that hobby are going to be doing so in a culturally relevant way that's then easier to talk about with other people. And that's great to do as a starting point and a necessary first step to becoming an expert in something. Let's bring it back to cooking up some fire fits. If you're looking at content about whether style or fashion is better, you're probably not some kind of fashion god with an endgame wardrobe and an infinite amount of money to cop whatever you want. You're more likely to be looking to gain some insight, to take something away from that content which changes or updates your way of thinking, or at least challenges you in some way. The kind of personal style people talk about as the goal, the thing that you should go out and do, probably describes these kind of fashion experts, people who have gone through loads of different styles of clothing and eventually have settled on a particular style or aesthetic that works for them and represents them in some way. Or they're people like actors and rappers, not only where their image and their identity is very tied to their business and their way of making money and remaining popular, but they're playing a different game to the rest of us. A lot of those people have basically got the infinite money cheat on. And yeah, that doesn't solve all the problems, but it does make things a bit easier. All of those people are very easy to look at and conclude, well, clearly that's better because all of the best dressed people have personal style. They are not just followers of fashion. And yeah, that's true, but it disregards that a lot of those people have probably gone through that process of being fashionable as a necessary step before getting to this ascension to godhood. From this perspective, advising people that personal style is better than dressing fashionably is like advising people that the 10-meter diving board is better than the 1-meter one, because the 10-meter board is where people do all the cool flips off at the Olympics. That's true, but everyone's first cool dive was off the 1-meter board, learning what to do in a safer and more controlled environment. And so no one has to go and stand at the top of the 10-meter board and look down and get really scared, and then you have to climb down again, and everyone calls you Scaredy Ann for the rest of the year. You also have to consider, for those looking for advice on how to dress, personal style, just like diving off the 10-meter board, is a lot easier to get wrong, because some people have personal style, and it isn't good. Similarly, if you decide the hard-boiled film noir detective is the look that best represents you, it is comically easy to end up looking like a Reddit mod if you get it slightly wrong, particularly if your experience with fashion is more limited. I see something similar within tech where people go from not caring about fashion at all to seeing some cool cyberpunk sort of images and thinking, yeah, I want to dress like that. And techwear is not an easy style to get right. I've certainly got it wrong in the past. If you dress in a more popular or conventional style and it goes slightly wrong, you're probably still fine, so you might as well start there rather than going sicko mode off the top board. I do want to dive a bit deeper though. Diving analogy. Because actually I don't think dressing fashionably is just a stepping stone to something better. Let's talk about what most people actually want from clothing. There is definitely a subset of people for whom clothing is about experimentation with new aesthetics, wearing things that others aren't, maybe even inspiring other people to enjoy the things that they enjoy, or even appreciating clothing at an artistry level. If anyone thinks that clothing isn't art, I'm showing them this. This leads them to wear more expressive or unusual stuff, maybe even clothing which is ugly by conventional standards because it plays with those conventions. I think most people though, at least to some extent, see clothing as solving a problem. And as a technical fashion nerd, this is definitely something that appeals to me. Like, I need to be warm when I'm going somewhere cold. I need to be smart and presentable when I'm in a more formal setting. Or, at a very fundamental level, I want to look good and I want other people to think that I look good. That is a very reasonable thing to want to do. Looking good is, well, good. But guess what? Fashion is a socially derived construct. God didn't come down on the 8th day and say, let there be drip, and since then everyone had an objective understanding of what makes cool clothing. That means if you want your average person to think, hey, they look cool, to some extent you'll probably want to incorporate fashionable items of clothing. That is, items which to some extent people at a societal level consider to be aesthetically pleasing. I don't need to look any further than my own TikTok account to see the effects of personal style versus fashion. It's fair to say I wear some things that are a bit more unusual, and they're things that I like rather than them being particularly fashionable. And as soon as that content leaves that audience of technical fashion enthusiasts, people do not like that stuff at all.
What the fuck? Oh my god, that's just weird, man. 3 out of 10, I'll be honest.
If you have no real interest or experience with fashion, there is a good chance that you hate some of my outfits. As a direct result of pursuing personal style, I actually look worse to a lot of people, and that's probably not something that a lot of people want. So again, the advice that style beats fashion might not be appropriate because it relies on you not caring what the people around you think of what you're wearing. Or at the very least, you have to be aware of the fact that what you're wearing is going to cause both positive and negative reactions in people. People take it for granted that it requires quite a lot of confidence and self-assuredness to wear something that you think the people around you are probably not going to like. I've definitely felt self-conscious in the past wearing more unusual clothing and knowing that other people are looking at me. Now let's be clear here, that doesn't mean that looking good equals copying the most micro-trendy items or whatever got the most likes on Instagram this week. It works in far broader terms. I think when people present this style versus fashion argument, they describe fashion items as these very specific micro-trend pieces, and then they use that as evidence to say, you don't want to buy those because they're not going to be cool next year, you're not going to want to wear them. That's true, but there are also far slower macro level trends, which is probably more sensible to engage with than totally ignore, because it gives you this socially derived framework of things which people are probably going to like, but within which there's still loads of room for creativity and finding what personally appeals to you. The best example I can give of this is skinny jeans versus basically anything else. 10 years ago, skinny jeans could do no wrong. If you wanted to look vaguely cool, just chuck on a pair of skinny jeans, put on some kind of shirt, and you're basically done. Now skinny and slim jeans are not so much talked about, and it's the straight and the wider cuts which are the ones that people want to wear. And this trend is so broad that even creators who focus on teaching men's style basics and personal style still adhere to it. You'll find them far more likely to recommend wide or straight cuts as basics or essentials, suggesting different types of straight pants so you can find your personal style. 10 years ago, they probably would have suggested different types of slim or skinny pants as essentials. And I think that advice is good. I think it's a legitimate way of helping to find your personal style, but let's not forget that those suggestions are still existing within that sphere of fashionable products at a macro level. That sphere is a very helpful and necessary guide to looking good by most people's standards. I was thinking about how I fit into this sphere as someone with a totally normal and regular interest in clothing. At the start of this video, I described how I dressed as based on a more consistent aesthetic or personal style than wearing very trendy items. I'm probably the kind of person others would describe as having personal style because I appear to have found a thing that works and represents me, wearing brands or pieces even if they're not super trendy, as if in some way I have progressed past fashion trends. I don't wear things I don't like, obviously, but fashion trends absolutely still guide and inform my purchasing behaviour. Sometimes that's in a very obvious way, like picking up items that I've seen because they are trending on social media. I really like those New Balance back there, the 1906, I bought them on release, but I might not have done that, I might not have even heard of them if this wasn't a fashionable aesthetic which gained a lot of press when these were first announced. Sometimes fashion trends guide what I wear in a much more subtle way. Remember, we talked about wider pants being something of a macro trend. As a result, there are more wide pants to choose from on the market, more inspiration for wide pants, more examples of wide pants looking cool. And at the same time, I too have gotten more comfortable with wearing those kinds of wider silhouettes. Even the big gorpcore and outdoor fashion trend, even though I've been wearing that kind of technical stuff before the big trend explosion, I've still been able to take advantage of the fact that there are more brands gaining popularity in that space and better availability of it because it's all being stocked at more retailers. I'm not wearing any of that stuff because it is a fashion trend and because I think it will make it cool, but it is still in some way guiding the things that I end up wearing. Personal style and fashion are typically presented as opposites, with one being more valuable than the other, but the more I think about it, the more I see them as two equally valuable sides of the same coin. At most, style might be the goal while fashion is the necessary process of getting there, but even then I think most people's personal style is more rooted in fashion than they would care to admit. And it's completely fine for that to be the case. I think getting away from fashion doesn't have to be the goal. Taking inspiration from the world around you and the way that others like to dress and adopting aspects of that into your own wardrobe is a very appropriate way to develop your style. Maybe even the most appropriate. After all, we are social creatures, and connecting with each other, even in a very superficial way like the clothing we happen to be wearing, is always going to have some value. Being informed by what other people are doing is not a weakness. If anything, true integration of social aesthetic trends into your style is a strength. This is an unusual topic. It took me a long time to organize my thoughts properly on all this stuff, so I really hope you enjoyed listening to it. Please do give me a like if you did. It is massively helpful, and it's a great signal to tell me to make more of this kind of stuff. And as always, would love to hear your perspective on the relationship of fashion versus style and where you kind of fit in these strange two interconnected spaces. As always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you very soon in the next one.